Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ryan Clarke.
One of the craziest things about being a lawyer is the moment that you become a lawyer. Some of you may be aware of this. On a Monday, you're not a lawyer. But on a Tuesday, you're a lawyer because you go to this ceremony where you're called to the bar. Now, the truth is, you have no more clue how to be a lawyer on the Tuesday than you did on the Monday. So, what do you do on the Tuesday when you suddenly find yourself being a lawyer? You pretend. You pretend to be a lawyer. Well, you are a lawyer. You pretend to know what to do as a lawyer. And when you pretend, it's very liberating because you get to fail, learn, and then do better. My first big motion in court, I think I'd been called for about 2 or 3 months. It's a 30-minute motion. I brought it on behalf of my client. And I prepared for this motion for weeks. It's only 30 minutes. And it was in front of a judge that I actually knew quite well. I had worked for her between the summer of second and third year of law school. So I got up to begin my submissions, which I did. And, I thought they were good, like really good, like Supreme Court level good submissions. And I think I was about 5 minutes into these brilliant submissions when the judge asked me a question consisting of 6 words. Mr. Clarke, what is your point? I had no idea. Had absolutely no idea what my point was. Because what I thought was going to happen was that I was going to, again, give these brilliant submissions in my own mind. And she was going to stop me at some point and say, Mr. Clarke, that was wonderful. You win. But that's not how it works at all. So I failed, granted at the expense of my client. I learned something, always have a point. And I've engaged in advocacy ever since. So here's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. Through the process of failure, my failure, what I learned, and then in turn, how we can all be better advocates for change. Advocacy to government in Canada, though, needs to start with one single word, and that is federalism. Federalism is the division of powers or the sharing of powers between the federal government and the provinces and territories. Only provinces in 1867, but both now. But these shared powers can often become very blurred. Now, before your eyes blur over, because you think I'm going to give you some kind of a lecture on federalism, I'm not going to do that. Like any good advocate, I'm only going to tell you what you need to know and not all that you could know about this. I'm going to spare you what I call the curse of knowledge. We have 3 sons. They're grown up now. But when our eldest son was 10, grade 5, he came home and he said, Dad, I have a quiz tomorrow on how government works in Canada. Now, I've been waiting for this moment. By grade 4, I was done with math. Science, I never even got off the ground. But I know how government works in Canada. I have an undergraduate degree in Canadian political science. I have a graduate degree with a major in Canadian political science. I have a law degree from a Canadian university. And to top it all off, I have worked in government here in Ontario. So, he said, to prepare for this quiz, I have an exercise. And the exercise is that I need you to help me draw a line from the word on the left to the phrase on the right. I said, okay. And he handed me this sheet. And I started reading it, and I started getting enraged. I said, what is this? He's 10. What is this? He said, well, that's the worksheet I have to go through. I said, it doesn't capture the subtleties between the executive branch and the judicial branch. Parts of it were wrong, by the way. I just want to tell you that. The phrases on the right, they're misleading. They're inaccurate. This is terrible. And I started going on and on and on. My wife's in the background watching this because she knows how this is going to unfold. And probably about 2 minutes into this diatribe, my son said, Dad, I have a quiz tomorrow. And to prepare for that quiz, the teacher has given us this sheet where we're supposed to draw a line from the word on the left to the phrase on the right, and I swear this is the words that came out of his mouth next. Can you do that? No, I can't do it. I cannot do that. I absolutely cannot do that because I know way too much about the issue. So I would suggest to you that if you're going to do advocacy and you're worried, I don't know that much about what I'm going to advocate for, that's good. That's a good thing. You can actually use your lack of knowledge to your advantage. So, Section 91 of the Constitution Act of 1867 sets out the federal powers. Section 92 sets out the provincial powers. Again, we only had provinces back in 1867, but the territories, of course, are included today. Now, some of these powers are exclusively federal. Divorce, exclusively federal, right from 1867. Some of these powers are exclusively provincial and territorial. Municipalities, for example. I trust you all know that municipalities exist at the pleasure of the provinces. The municipalities have no constitutional standing in this country at all. Some of these powers have been shared between the two levels of government right from 1867. Marriage is a good example. But then things start to get a little bit blurry. Areas that are not explicitly in the Constitution Act of 1867, but that have evolved into shared powers. Housing is a wonderful example. Housing, I trust many of you know this, is federal, provincial, and municipal. It's all three levels of government. And then areas that were shared in 1867 but have evolved dramatically, healthcare is the obvious example. But that's both the beauty and the frustration of federalism. The beauty is that local issues are tailored to local needs. That's good. But the frustration, when this country wants to do something on a national scale, something big, systemic change, we find ourselves mired in all of these different policies, priorities, politics, and timelines. And there are few pathways that are longer and more winding than publicly funded access to medications. It is federalism at its blurriest. My second year of practice, I only practiced for 2.5 years. My second year of practice, there had been some judges recently appointed to the family court where I practiced. I practiced exclusively family law. And neither one of those judges had ever been a family law lawyer. That should concern you, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. And so I found myself appearing in front of these two judges and going into some detail about the legislation that I needed them to understand, the Divorce Act, the Children's Law Reform Act, and the Family Law Act. Teaching them, explaining to them about this legislation. It was important. Then one day, I found myself in front of a newly appointed judge, but he was from out of town. And I appeared in front of him, and I walked him through the Family Law Act, this is provincial legislation here in Ontario, in a way that you would talk to a 5-year-old. Not a kid in grade 5, an actual 5-year-old. So I got back to the office, and I said to my principal, oh, I just appeared in front of Justice so-and-so for the first time. And I walked him through the Family Law Act. He seemed to get it. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I walked Justice so-and-so through the legislation. I think he seems pretty sharp." And he looked at me and he said, "He wrote the Family Law Act." He was an assistant deputy minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General here in Ontario, and he is widely credited as the author of the legislation. To which I said, "Well, then I guess he gets it." Remember the importance of knowing to whom you are advocating. So, the federal government is responsible for a number of things when it comes to access to medications. The province is also responsible for other things. We have 19 public drug plans in Canada. 19. But then things start to get a bit blurry. Because in addition to that, we have something called the Canadian Drug Agency and the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. But they're not federal. They're also not provincial. They're national. They're national, which is code for the provinces and the federal government got together and said, let's make something up. Let's make something up. With absolutely no political accountability, no constitutional accountability, no legal accountability, because it's not federal and it's not provincial. And the only levels of government that are covered in the Constitution are federal and provincial. That's blurriness. And yet they take deliberations that affect access to those medications for many, many people. So it's time for some eye drops. It's time for some new glasses. It's time for clarity. It's time for advocacy. I believe advocacy is a life skill that we are born with that unfortunately most of us become worse at over time. The truth is that we peak at our ability to do advocacy when we are 2 close to 3. When our youngest son was 2, close to 3, we would go through the drive-thru at Tim Hortons. And every time we did, I would hear this little voice say the word Timbit over and over again. Now, as a parent, I have 2 choices. I can give in, give him the Timbits, it's over. Or I could somehow try to reason with a 2-year-old and explain to him that you can't always get what you want, you have to be patient, all of these other sorts of things, and today we're not going to give you a Timbit. Oh, no, he's getting the Timbits because I don't want to have to deal with this. And any parent has done something similar to this. But when we become older and we become socialized and we learn that we have to be, as I said, patient and mindful of others, you don't behave like this anymore. In fact, and I'm going to read this because I've chosen these words very carefully, socially acceptable behavior is not a recipe for success in advocating to government for systemic change. I'm going to say it again. Socially acceptable behavior is not a recipe for success in advocating to government for systemic change. You need to find your inner 2-year-old, and you need to pair them up with what I'm going to conclude with, which is 2 pillars and 3 steps to create an impactful advocacy strategy. The first pillar, tell personal stories. They bring to life the matter that you're trying to advocate for change around. One of the only events I remember from the time that I worked in government was an invitation I got to attend an event at Medtronic. Medtronic is a global medical device company. And at that event, there was a patient's spouse, and a nurse. And the nurse got up and started to talk about how sick this man had been before he got the pacemaker. And clinically, what was happening to him, and then how it had improved, his health had improved after he got the pacemaker. Then his wife got up and she spoke only about their family and what it was like when he was sick, how he couldn't pick up his grandkids, he couldn't play with them, but after getting this pacemaker, he was fully engaged now in the life of the family. By the time the patient got up, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. He spoke only for a minute, and all he said was thank you. Thank you to everybody who had helped him on his journey from being very, very sick to being very, very well again. That's the impact of telling a personal story. The second pillar, you need to build relationships with people of influence. And it's prefaced on a very, very simple notion that we as human beings are more likely to help somebody that we know and like than somebody we've never met before. I remember it was very early on when I worked in government, and I was contacted by a lobbyist who said, I want to take you to lunch. So we went for lunch, the University Club, just over there. And he brought a big package of material from his company. And I thought, oh, well, he's just going to go through this material. He's going to tell me all about his issues, and this will be a real thrill. But he said, I want you to take this package of material. I'm not going to go through it today. I'll make an appointment separately. I'll come and see you at your office. But let's set that aside and tell me, where are you from? And we just had a conversation back and forth over the course of that lunch. And we got to know each other. And at the conclusion of that lunch, this will not surprise you, we determined that we had a whole bunch of people in common that we knew. We'd had some shared experiences. And this was all by design. This was all by design, to get to know somebody as a person. And I know because I took that, what he did to me, and I did it with other people when I became a lobbyist. It's very, very effective at building relationships, which are so important. Now, we're going to move from our 2 pillars to our 3 steps. First step is key messages, determining what it is you want to say about the issue that you want to bring change around. Each 3 key message should be 25 words or less, and they need to be clear, compelling, concise, and consistent. When I develop key messages, or I used to do this, I used to use something called the 14-year-old boy test. It doesn't work with girls, they're too smart. You need boys. If you can deliver your 2 to 3 key messages to a 14-year-old boy, and he has some clue what you're talking about, I don't care how complicated the issue is. I don't care what the issue is, then you have conveyed the core elements in a compact manner. If he has no clue what you're talking about, then you have not conveyed the core elements in a compact manner. Now, I'm not equating 14-year-old boys with politicians, but maybe there's something to that. Step 2, your tools. These are the means of delivering these key messages I just talked to you about. And you can utilize many different tools over time in order to convey that information. And it's just things like face-to-face meetings and petitions and postcards and social media, and anything that you have or produce that may be used to communicate with people is a potential tool. And finally, your one ask, because you're going to ask for the one thing you need and not a list of what you want. I'm going to say that again. You're going to ask for the one thing that you need and not a list of what you want. Advocacy is not Christmas. It's not a chance to ask for everything you've ever wanted. You need to stay focused on that one thing that you need. Even if you need more than one thing, it's only one thing at a time. The other important point here, your ask needs to be tangible. It needs to be real. The words that politicians in particular use to make a living, support, help, commitment, are the enemies of advocacy because they don't mean anything. Bring me a plate of help. Bring me a cup of support. They're not things that are tangible, so they don't mean anything, and they can't be used to bring change. And finally, my last slide, summary of some of what I've spoken about with you this evening, but I draw your attention to the last bullet. Section 2 of the Charter talks about freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. We all have, a constitutionally protected right to advocate to government. You couldn't get rid of it if you wanted to. In legal terms, it attaches to you as a Canadian. So, if you've never done advocacy before and you have no idea how to do it, pretend. Try. You'll fail. You'll learn, you'll get better. Our system has a lot of blurriness to it. That's okay. That's fine. Embrace the blurriness. We can even leverage the blurriness sometimes. It is what it is. And finally, you keep those 2 pillars in mind, you keep those 3 steps in mind, and you can make the change that you need. Thank you.